At midnight, my sister lifted her champagne glass, smiling the way she always did, polished, flawless, untouchable. Cheers to Ebony, she said sweetly, the one who never quite makes it. The room erupted. My parents laughed. Her husband laughed. I didn't cry. I didn't hesitate. I raised my glass of water and spoke one sentence. The laughter died and everything shifted. Thank you for showing up. Before we step into a room where respect is tested and power quietly changes hands, tell me where you're watching from, your city, your country, anywhere. And let me know, have you ever realized you were the one holding the leverage while others mocked you? Also, please note, this story blends fictional elements for narrative and educational use. Any overlap with real names or situations is coincidental, though the insight it offers is intended to be valuable. My name is Ebony, and at 32 years old, I had mastered the art of being invisible. The night of the New Year's Eve party started in the back of a bruised Toyota Camry Uber. Outside the window, the Atlanta skyline was a blur of lights, but my destination, the Sapphire Tower, loomed like a fortress of glass and steel. This was the most exclusive address in the city. It was where the new money mixed with the old money, where appearances were the only currency that mattered. I thanked the driver and stepped out onto the curb. The cold wind bit at my face, but I barely felt it. I adjusted my black hoodie. To the untrained eye, it looked like something picked up from a discount rack. In reality, it was pure Italian cashmere worth $800, soft as butter and warmer than any of the sequined gowns heading through the revolving doors. But I knew what the world saw. They saw a dark-skinned woman in street clothes trying to enter a palace. I walked toward the entrance head high, my phone clutched in my hand. A massive security guard with a chest like a barrel stepped directly in my path. He did not ask for my name. He did not ask for my invitation. He simply held up a hand, palm out, stopping me cold. "Deliveries are around the back, miss," he said, his voice flat and bored. "Food delivery and staff entrance is on the north side. Do not block the guests." I stopped. I did not raise my voice. I look at him, analyzing him the way I analyze risk portfolios at work. "I am a guest," I said calmly. "I am here for the Williams party in the penthouse." The guard looked me up and down. He took in the hoodie, the jeans, the lack of jewelry. He let out a short, sharp laugh. "The Williams party is a black tie event. I know the family. They do not have guests who look like you. Now move along before I call the police for loitering." My pulse did not speed up. This was the game. It had always been the game. Just as I opened my mouth to speak, the automatic doors slid open. A gust of warm, perfumed air rushed out, followed by the sound of high heels clicking on marble. It was Vanessa. My sister. She was surrounded by her entourage, 3 women in fur coats who laughed at everything she said. Vanessa looked radiant in a silver gown that clung to her body, diamonds sparkling at her throat. She looked like a queen holding court. "Vanessa," I called out. She stopped. Her eyes found me instantly. For a split second, I saw recognition. She saw her little sister being blocked by a security guard like a common criminal. She saw the guard's hand resting on his belt, ready to escalate. A normal sister would have rushed over. A normal sister would have said, "Let her in, that is family." But Vanessa was not normal. She smiled, a cruel, tight expression that did not reach her eyes. She looked at the guard, then looked at me, and then she looked right through me. She turned back to her friends, laughed loudly at a joke no one had made, and walked straight toward the waiting limousine. She left me there. She chose to let me be humiliated rather than acknowledge we shared the same blood. That was the moment the last thread of loyalty snapped. I did not feel sadness. I felt the cold clarity of a sniper adjusting their scope. I looked at the guard again. I pulled up the QR code on my phone, the VIP invitation that had been sent automatically to all family members, the one Vanessa had forgotten to block. "Scan it," I said. My voice was low, but it carried enough authority that he blinked. He pulled out his scanner, smirking, ready for it to beep red so he could throw me off the property. He aimed the red laser at my screen. The device let out a cheerful melodic chime. Valid entry, VIP guest, access all floors. The smirk vanished from his face. He looked at the device, then back at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. I snatched my phone back. I did not wait for an apology I knew he was not capable of giving. I pushed past him, my shoulder brushing against his uniform, and walked into the lobby. The marble floors reflected the massive chandeliers above. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the penthouse. As the doors closed, shutting out the cold and the guard, I checked my bank app one last time. The transfer was complete. I was ready for war. The elevator ride was swift and silent, a stark contrast to the noise that hit me when the doors opened on the top floor. The bass of the music thumped against my chest. The air smelled of expensive cologne, roasted duck, and desperation. The penthouse was crowded with the elite of Atlanta. Doctors, lawyers, tech entrepreneurs, all posturing, all proving they belonged. I moved through the crowd like a shadow. My dark outfit made me stick out in the sea of gold, silver, and cream-colored tuxedos. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. I heard the whispers. "Who is that? Is that the help? Did someone let the cleaning lady stay?" "Ebony!" The voice was sharp, cutting through the music. I turned to see my mother Viola. She was holding a glass of champagne, standing next to a tower of macarons. She looked impeccable in a cream-colored gown that complemented her light skin. She did not smile. She did not open her arms. She looked at me with the same expression one might use when finding a stain on a silk rug. "Hello, Mother," I said. She stepped closer, invading my personal space, her hand reaching out not to touch my face, but to tug at the collar of my hoodie, trying to hide it. "You actually came," she hissed, keeping her voice low so her friends wouldn't hear. "And you came wearing that? Did you lose your mirror, Ebony? Or are you trying to embarrass us on purpose?" "I came to see family," I replied, stepping back from her touch. "Family respects the aesthetic," she snapped. "Look at your sister. Look at Vanessa. She shines. She lights up the room. And then there is you. You are so dark. You stand in the corner and you absorb the light. You look like a bruise on a perfect peach." The words were old. I had heard them since I was 5 years old. The colorism in my family was not subtle. It was a weapon my mother wielded daily. Vanessa with her caramel skin and loose curls was the prize. I with my deep mahogany skin and tight coils was the mistake. "Go find a seat," she said, waving her hand dismissively toward the back of the room. "Not at the main tables. Those are for the investors and the people who matter. I had a setting put up near the kitchen doors for the children and the nannies. You will fit in better there. Try not to speak to anyone important. I do not want you explaining why at 32 you are still single and renting a shoebox apartment." She turned her back on me before I could answer, instantly switching her face to a beaming smile as she greeted a local politician. I stood there for a moment watching her. She moved with the grace of a woman who believed she owned the world. She had no idea she was standing on a trapdoor. I walked to the back of the room, past the tables laden with lobster and caviar, past the ice sculptures, past the laughter of people who had never worried about an overdraft fee. The table my mother had assigned to me was exactly where she said it would be. It was a small folding circular table shoved against the swinging doors of the catering kitchen. Every time a waiter walked out with a tray of hot food, the door would hit the back of the chairs. Sitting there were 3 toddlers in tuxedos and 2 tired-looking nannies who were trying to keep them from throwing food. There was no name card for me, just an empty space, a placemat made of paper while the other tables had linen. I sat down. One of the nannies looked at me sympathetically. "Rough night?" she asked softly. I looked at the main table in the center of the room. I saw Vanessa sitting on her husband Brad's lap, laughing as he fed her a grape. I saw my father Otis pouring expensive scotch for his friends, pointing at Brad and bragging about the family's success. They looked like a royalty painting. They looked untouchable. No, I told the nanny, my eyes fixed on my sister's diamond necklace. It is not a rough night. It is a perfect night. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I opened the email draft I had prepared 3 days ago. The subject line read, "Notice of immediate lease termination." My finger hovered over the send button. I watched them eat. I watched them drink wine that cost more than my first car. I decided to wait. I wanted them to be full. I wanted them to be high on their own ego, because the higher they climbed, the harder the fall would be. I sat back in the folding chair, crossed my legs, and waited for the toast. The countdown had begun. The music seemed to fade into a dull thrum as a shadow fell across my folding table. I did not need to look up to know who it was. The scent of expensive scotch and even more expensive cologne arrived seconds before the man himself. It was Brad, my sister Vanessa's husband, the self-proclaimed golden boy of the tech world. To the rest of the room, Brad was the epitome of success. He was tall, with the kind of confident jawline that suggested he had never been told no in his entire life. He wore a tuxedo that cost more than my first car, and on his wrist sat a Rolex Daytona that he made sure to flash every time he raised his glass. He did not pull up a chair. That would imply we were equals. Instead, he stood over me, looming, forcing me to crane my neck to look at him. He swirled the amber liquid in his crystal glass, the ice clinking with a sound that grated on my nerves. "Hey there, Ebony," he said, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of the nearby nannies, but quiet enough to keep the VIPs from hearing his tone. "Enjoying the kids' menu?" I think I saw a chicken nugget on that tray. I slowly cut a piece of the cold, rubbery chicken breast that had been served to the staff table. "It is fine, Brad," I said, keeping my eyes on my plate. "Is there something you need?" He laughed, a short, sharp bark of a sound. "Need from you?" "Oh, Ebony, you are funny. No, I just wanted to come down here and check on the less fortunate. Vanessa was worried you might feel out of place, with everyone else being accomplished." I set my fork down. The metal clattered against the cheap ceramic plate. I took a deep breath, centering myself. This was his favorite game. He called it advice. I called it emotional warfare. He took a sip of his scotch and leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that felt like slime sliding down my back. "Look, I was talking to Senator Davis over at the main table. We were discussing the future of the economy. Big things are happening, Ebony. Massive shifts. And it got me thinking about you." I remained silent, my face a mask of indifference. "You cannot keep doing this freelance computer thing," he continued, waving his hand vaguely at my hoodie. "I mean, look at you. You are 32. No benefits, no 401k, no stability. It is embarrassing for Vanessa. People ask what her sister does, and she has to make things up. She tells them you are in between opportunities. It is charitable, really." He paused, waiting for me to beg for his wisdom. When I didn't, he smiled, revealing teeth that were whitened to an unnatural brightness. "I have an idea for you," he said, tapping his finger against his temple. "I was looking at your hands. You have got strong hands, and you know the service industry is booming. Have you thought about cosmetology, or maybe a nail technician course?" The insult landed with the precision of a surgical strike. It was not just a suggestion. It was a microaggression wrapped in a ribbon of fake concern. He was telling me that a black woman with my skin tone in his eyes belonged in service. He saw me bowing over someone's feet, scrubbing their calluses, not sitting in a boardroom. "My cousin runs a salon in the South Side," he went on, clearly pleased with his own benevolence. "I could probably make a call. Get you a discount on the certification. It is cash-heavy, Ebony. Good for people like you. You know, people who might have trouble with credit checks and bank accounts." I felt the anger rise in my chest, hot and suffocating, but I forced it down. I pushed it into the same cold storage where I kept the knowledge of his bank balances. He thought I was destitute. He thought I was a charity case. He had no idea that the freelance computer thing he mocked was actually high-frequency algorithmic trading and risk management for three of the largest hedge funds in New York. I looked up at him, finally meeting his gaze. His blue eyes were glassy with alcohol and arrogance. "That is an interesting suggestion, Brad," I said, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. "But I have been doing some reading lately. About the tech sector." He rolled his eyes, clearly bored. "Oh, reading blogs. That is cute. I read about your company Tech, Brad." I continued, ignoring his jab. "I saw the press release about your Series A funding round. $10 million valuation. That is impressive." Brad straightened up his chest, puffing out like a peacock. Finally, a topic he loved. Himself. "Yeah, well, we are disrupting the market," he boasted, his voice rising so the nearby tables could hear. "We are leveraging AI to optimize supply chain logistics. The investors are fighting to get in. I had to turn people away last week. We are going to be the next unicorn. I am thinking of taking us public in 18 months. I nodded slowly, pretending to be awed. "Wow. Public in 18 months. That is ambitious." "It is not ambitious if you are a visionary," he scoffed. "You would not understand the pressure, Ebony. Managing that kind of capital. It is a burden, really. Heavy is the head that wears the crown." I picked up my glass of water and took a sip, watching him over the rim. It was time to test the waters, time to see if he even understood the vocabulary of the lie he was living. "I was curious, though," I said, setting the glass down. "I looked at the public filings for companies in your sector. The burn rate for SaaS models is usually quite high in the first quarter. With the current interest rates affecting venture capital liquidity, aren't you worried about your current ratio?" Brad blinked. The smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he recovered quickly. "Excuse me?" he asked. "Your liquidity ratio?" I repeated, keeping my tone innocent. "Specifically, the quick ratio. If you take your cash and equivalents and divide them by your current liabilities, where do you stand?" "Because I heard the lead investor on your Series A pulled out a contingency clause. If your operational costs exceed revenue for 3 consecutive months, they can freeze the assets." I watched the color drain from his face. It was subtle, but it was there. His eyes darted to the side, a classic tell. I had just used terminology that no nail technician student should know. I had touched the third rail of his anxiety. He didn't know I knew about the investor clause. He thought that was a secret between him and his empty bank account. He laughed, but it was a nervous, hollow sound. He took a large gulp of his scotch. "Wow," he said, shaking his head. "You really have been reading blogs, haven't you? Throwing around buzzwords you do not understand? Liquidity ratio. Did you Google that in the Uber on the way here?" He leaned down again, his face inches from mine, the smell of alcohol overpowering. "Let me give you a real piece of advice, Ebony." He hissed, the mask of the benevolent brother-in-law slipping completely. "Stop trying to sound smart. It does not suit you. You do not know the first thing about finance. You do not know about burn rates or investors or assets. You are a 32-year-old woman wearing a hoodie at a black tie gala." He poked a finger into the table right next to my hand. "You worry about your own liquidity," he spat. "Worry about paying your rent so you do not have to beg Vanessa for money again next month. Leave the big numbers to the men who actually make money. Stick to painting nails, Ebony. It is the only way you will ever touch gold." He straightened up, adjusted his tuxedo jacket, and gave me one last look of utter contempt. Then he turned on his heel and walked back toward the main table, back to the light, back to the applause. I watched him go. My heart was beating calmly, a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. He thought he had won. He thought he had put me in my place. He had no idea that I wasn't asking about his liquidity ratio because I was curious. I was asking because I was the one who had written the contingency clause he was so afraid of. I was the investor. I looked down at my hands, the hands he said were made for scrubbing feet. I opened my phone and logged into the secure portal of Ebony Holdings, LLC. I navigated to the portfolio marked Tech Brad Ventures. I looked at the line item for operating capital. It was currently green active. I smiled. It was the only smile I had allowed myself all night. "Enjoy your scotch, Brad," I whispered to the empty air, "because in about 20 minutes you are going to find out that the nail technician owns the bank." I closed the phone and sat back. The nannies were looking at me with pity, thinking I had just been scolded by a successful man. I didn't correct them. I just waited. The lecture was over. But class was about to begin. The digital clock on the marble mantelpiece clicked over to 11:55. 5 minutes to midnight. 5 minutes until the year changed. 5 minutes until the lease on the penthouse legally expired. The atmosphere in the room had reached a fever pitch. Champagne corks were popping with the frequency of gunfire, a sound that usually signaled celebration, but to my ears sounded like the opening shots of a revolution. The waiters were circulating with silver trays of fresh flutes, ensuring that no hand was empty when the ball dropped. The air was thick with the smell of expensive perfume hairspray and the distinct metallic scent of unearned arrogance. I sat at my folding table near the kitchen doors, my fingers resting lightly on the cool surface of my phone. The screen was dark, but I knew exactly what was waiting behind the lock screen. The email confirmation from the property management company, the timestamp on the transfer withdrawal, the nuclear codes that would level this entire party. I watched them. I watched my father Otis laughing loudly at a joke a senator had made, his hand clapping the man on the shoulder with a familiarity that was not reciprocated. I watched my mother Viola preening for a photographer, tilting her head to catch the light just right, ensuring her good side was the only side the world saw. And then there was Vanessa. She moved to the center of the room near the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city she pretended to own. She signaled to a waiter who rushed over to hand her a fresh glass of vintage Dom Perignon. She held a silver spoon in her other hand and tapped it against the crystal. The sound was sharp, piercing through the bass of the music and the roar of conversation. Ting, ting, ting. The room fell silent. It was a conditioned response. When the queen bee demanded attention, the hive obeyed. The music was lowered. 50 pairs of eyes turned toward her. She stood there, bathed in the soft glow of the chandeliers, her sequined dress shimmering like a second skin. She looked beautiful. I could not deny that. She had the kind of beauty that demanded tribute, but I knew the rot that lived beneath the sequins. "Thank you, everyone." Vanessa began, her voice breathless and giddy. "Thank you all for ringing in the new year with us. Brad and I are so incredibly blessed to have you in our home." There was a murmur of appreciation from the crowd. Someone shouted, "We love you, Vanessa." She giggled, a sound that made my stomach turn. "We look around this room and we see success," she continued, gesturing broadly with her glass. "We see power. We see the future of Atlanta. And it makes me so proud to stand here beside my husband Brad, who has worked so tirelessly to build our empire." Brad stepped up beside her, puffing out his chest, looking every bit the conquering hero she described, completely ignoring the fact that his credit card had been declined for a tank of gas 3 weeks ago. But Vanessa said, and her voice dropped an octave, taking on a tone of sickly, sweet compassion that I knew all too well. "As we celebrate our abundance, we must not forget those who are struggling. We must not forget charity." My skin prickled. I knew what was coming. I saw her eyes scan the room, bypassing the doctors and the lawyers until they landed on the dark corner near the kitchen. They landed on me. The crowd followed her gaze. 50 heads turned. I felt the weight of their judgment, heavy and suffocating. "I want to propose a special toast," Vanessa said, raising her glass higher. "To my little sister, Ebony." The spotlight was on me now. There was no hiding. I sat perfectly still, my hand gripping my glass of tap water. "To Ebony," Vanessa continued, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "Who is so brave? It takes a lot of courage to show up to a black tie gala in a hoodie. It takes a lot of courage to sit among success when you are, well, still figuring things out." A few people chuckled. My mother covered her mouth to hide a smile. "To the one who always shows up." Vanessa said, her voice dripping with poison. Even when she is broke, even when she is desperate, even when she is still trying to prove she matters, in a world that has clearly moved on without her. The laughter grew louder. It wasn't just a chuckle now, it was open mockery. But do not worry, little sister, Vanessa added, delivering the final blow. I know times are tough. I told the caterers to pack up the leftovers for you. You will not starve this week. Just wait by the back door when you leave. I will make sure you get a doggy bag. The room erupted. It was a roar of laughter, a tidal wave of humiliation. My parents were laughing the hardest. My father was wiping a tear from his eye. My mother was shaking her head, looking at her friends as if to say, "Can you believe we have to deal with her?" Brad was slapping his knee, looking at me with triumph. They expected me to cry. They expected me to run out of the room, head bowed, ashamed of my existence. That is what the old Ebony would have done. The Ebony who sought their approval. The Ebony who thought love was something you could earn if you just took enough abuse. But that Ebony died the moment the security guard blocked my path downstairs. I slowly pushed my chair back. The metal legs scraped against the parquet floor with a harsh grinding sound that cut through the laughter. I stood up. I picked up my glass of water. I did not look down. I did not look away. I looked straight at Vanessa. The laughter died down, replaced by a confused silence. They were waiting for the meltdown. They were waiting for the scene. I took a step forward out of the shadows of the kitchen corner into the light. "Thank you, Vanessa," I said. My voice was calm. It was steady. It projected across the room without a microphone, fueled by a lifetime of silence. Before I reveal what I did next, pause for a second and let me know you're still here. Drop 1 in the comments if you think Ebony is about to walk away, or 2 if you believe she's about to strike back. And tell me, how do you think Ebony will respond after being humiliated like this? Also, a quick note. The next part of this story includes some fictionalized elements added for storytelling and reflection. If that's not something you want to continue with, you're free to stop watching here. I raised my water glass, mirroring her pose. "That was a beautiful speech," I continued. "Really touching. And since we are sharing truths, and since we are talking about charity, I would like to propose a toast of my own." Vanessa looked confused, her smile faltered. This was not in the script. "To my sister," I said, taking another step closer, "and to her husband, Brad. May your new year be as authentic as your bank accounts." Brad's face went pale, the room went deadly quiet, and I added, my eyes locking onto hers. "To the one who actually pays for the roof over your head, to the one who has quietly covered the rent on this penthouse for the last 2 years because you spent the money on handbags and trips to Tulum." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Vanessa opened her mouth to speak, to deny it, but I did not let her. To the one whose rent account I just closed, I declared, my voice hard as steel. 1:12 midnight, Vanessa. That is in 2 minutes. When that clock strikes 12, this lease is terminated. I took a sip of my water, the cool liquid soothing my dry throat. "You are not the owner of this penthouse," I said, lowering the glass. "You are a squatter. And I am the landlord." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb that had just detonated, stripping away the facade, leaving nothing but the naked, ugly truth. I checked my watch. 1 minute to midnight. 1 minute until eviction. Happy New Year, family. The silence that followed my declaration was heavy, thick enough to choke on. For 3 seconds, the only sound in the penthouse was the distant hum of the refrigerator and the wind howling against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Then Brad shattered it. "You are insane," he screamed. The vein in his neck bulged, turning a dark, ugly purple against his flushed skin. He lunged forward, slamming his hand onto the table, causing the silverware to jump and clatter. "You are drunk, Ebony. You come into my house, you eat my food, and you spew these delusions. I signed a 2-year lease on this place. I signed it with the top real estate firm in Atlanta." He looked around the room, his eyes wild, begging the guests to side with him. He was desperate to regain control of the narrative. "She is mentally unstable," he shouted to the room at large, pointing a shaking finger at me. We have tried to get her help. We have tried to support her. But this is too much. This is harassment. My mother Viola rushed to his side, clutching her pearls as if she were physically pained by my existence. "Oh, Ebony," she wailed, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and embarrassment. "How could you, ruining your sister's big night with these lies? You are jealous. We all know you are jealous. But to make up something this ridiculous, you need professional help." Brad straightened up, emboldened by my mother's support. He pulled his phone from his tuxedo pocket. "I am calling the police," he announced, his voice booming with false authority. "I am having you removed for trespassing and harassment. You want to play games? Fine. You can explain your little landlord fantasy to the officers while you sit in a cell." The guests shifted uncomfortably. I saw a few people checking their watches, wondering if they could slip away before the police arrived. The nannies at my table looked terrified, pulling the children closer. But I did not move. I did not run. I did not even blink. I watched Brad dial the 3 numbers, his fingers clumsy with rage. I watched him hold the phone to his ear, his eyes locking onto mine with a look of pure hatred. "Go ahead, Brad," I said softly. My voice was calm, a stark contrast to his hysteria. "Call them. In fact, ask for Officer Miller. He is the one who usually handles evictions for my properties. He knows the paperwork well." Brad froze. The phone was still at his ear, but he didn't speak. Doubt, a tiny, cold worm of fear, flickered in his eyes. I reached into the pocket of my hoodie. My movement was slow, deliberate. I saw Vanessa flinch as if she thought I was pulling out a weapon. In a way, I was. I pulled out my iPhone. I did not speak. Words were unnecessary now. I swiped down on the control center. I tapped the screen mirroring icon. The list of available devices popped up instantly. Living room main display. I tapped it. Across the room, the massive 100-inch television, which had been playing a loop of ambient New Year's fireworks, suddenly went black. The music cut out. The room gasped. Brad lowered his phone, turning to look at the screen. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "Stop hacking my system." A spinning wheel appeared on the giant screen. And then the image resolved. It was crisp. It was high definition. It was undeniable. It was a legal document, a deed of trust recorded with the Fulton County Clerk's office. At the very top, in bold, undeniable letters, was the owner's name, Ebony Holdings, LLC. Below that, a digital signature that matched the one on my driver's license. The room went deadly silent again, but this time the texture of the silence was different. It wasn't awkward. It was stunned. It was the sound of 50 wealthy, intelligent people simultaneously realizing they had been lied to. I swiped left on my phone. The image on the TV changed. Now it was an email chain. The font was large enough for everyone in the back of the room to read. The subject line read, "Notice of default and lease termination." The sender was me. The recipient was Vanessa. I read the email out loud, my voice harmonizing with the text on the screen. "Dear Vanessa, per our conversation on October 1st, November 1st, and December 1st, you are now 90 days past due on the rent for Unit 45B. As agreed, I have covered these costs personally to avoid eviction proceedings against you and Brad, under the condition that you would repay the debt once Brad's funding came through." I swiped again. A new document appeared, a bank statement. However, I continued reading, my eyes never leaving Brad's face. "As of today, December 31st, no payment has been received. Furthermore, I have been notified that the funds provided to you for housing were misappropriated." Brad dropped his phone. It hit the hardwood floor with a loud crack, shattering the screen. He didn't seem to notice. He was staring at the TV, his mouth slightly open. He looked from the screen to Vanessa. Vanessa was trembling. She was gripping the edge of a chair so hard her knuckles were white. She looked like a trapped animal. "Brad," a voice called out from the crowd. It was Senator Davis. He stepped forward, his brow furrowed. He looked at the screen, then at Brad. "Brad," the senator said, his voice grave, "that document looks authentic. Is this true? Does her company own this building? Brad stammered. He looked around wildly. No. No, it is a trick. She is good with computers. She photoshopped it. It is a deep fake. I swiped again. This time it wasn't a document. It was a video. It was security footage from the building's lobby dated 3 months ago. It showed me sitting in the management office signing a stack of papers. The building manager, a man many of the guests recognized, was shaking my hand. Congratulations on the acquisition, Miss Williams, the manager said clearly in the video. We are happy to have Ebony Holdings taking over the property. I paused the video. I looked at the crowd. I bought this building 3 months ago, I said, addressing the room. I bought it because the previous management company was going to evict my sister. I bought it to save them. And I let them stay here rent-free for 90 days. I turned to Brad. You said you signed a 2-year lease, Brad, I asked. Show me. Show me the lease. Go get it. It should be in your safe. Brad didn't move. He couldn't move. Because there was no lease. There never had been a 2-year lease. There was only a month-to-month agreement that Vanessa had begged me for keeping the truth from her husband so he could continue playing the big shot CEO. The whispers started then. They started low like the buzzing of bees and then grew louder. She owns the building. Did you see the LLC name? Wait, so Brad is broke? I thought they owned this place. The tide was turning. I could feel it physically shifting in the room. The mocking smiles that had been directed at me were gone. Now the eyes were turned toward the golden couple. The admiration was evaporating, replaced by suspicion and the hungry curiosity of people witnessing a public execution. My mother looked frantic. She rushed over to the TV as if she could physically block the image with her body. Turn it off, she shrieked at me. Stop this right now, Ebony. You are humiliating us. I am not humiliating you, Mother, I said calmly. I am just providing the entertainment. You wanted a toast. You wanted to talk about who matters. I tapped my phone one more time. The screen went black for a second, then a new logo appeared. It was the logo of the bank where my father had claimed to have a secure retirement fund. Shall we check the family accounts next? I asked. My father, Otis, went pale. He sat down heavily in his chair, clutching his chest. Brad finally found his voice. It was a strangled, desperate sound. Get out, he whispered. I tilted my head. Excuse me. Get out of my house, he screamed, lunging toward me again. I didn't flinch. I just pointed at the TV screen where the eviction notice was still glowing bright and cruel. Your house? I asked. I checked the time on my phone. It is 12:01, Brad. Happy New Year. And according to this document, you are currently trespassing on my property. I looked at the security guard who had blocked me downstairs. He was standing by the elevator watching the scene unfold. He looked terrified. He realized he had stopped the owner of the building. Security, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. The guard snapped to attention. Yes, ma'am. These people are no longer tenants, I said, pointing at my sister and her husband. Please escort them out. Brad looked at the guard. He looked at his guests. He looked at me. And for the first time all night, I saw the arrogance shatter completely. He wasn't the CEO anymore. He wasn't the golden boy. He was just a man who had been caught in a lie that was too big to carry. And I was the one holding the receipt. The 100-inch ultra-high-definition screen that usually displayed my brother-in-law's vanity slideshows was now glowing with a stark white light. It was blinding in the dim room, acting like a spotlight of truth that no one could look away from. The image was crystal clear. It was a screenshot of an email zoomed in so that every pixel was sharp, every letter a dagger. At the top left corner, the logo was unmistakable. It was a stylized E, intertwined with an H in gold leaf font. Ebony Holdings, LLC. Below the logo, the sender field read, Management Office, the Sapphire Tower. The recipient field read, Ebony Williams, owner. The subject line was highlighted in bold red. Final notice of default and immediate lease termination regarding Unit 45B. Tenants, Brad and Vanessa Jenkins. I stood silently by the television, my hands clasped behind my back, watching the room process the information. It takes the human brain a moment to reconcile two conflicting realities. For years, these people believed Vanessa and Brad were the owners of this penthouse. They believed I was the charity case. Now the screen was telling them the exact opposite. I saw Senator Davis squinting at the text. I saw my mother's mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. But mostly, I watched Brad. Brad was staring at the screen with the intensity of a man watching a car crash in slow motion. His eyes darted from the logo to the subject line and then down to the body of the email. I knew exactly what he was reading because I had written the response myself just 4 hours ago. The text on the screen read as follows: Dear Ms. Williams, per your instruction, we have prepared the eviction notice for the tenants in Unit 45B. The tenants are currently 90 days past due on their lease payments. As the owner of the unit, you have the right to remove them immediately upon the expiration of the current month-to-month agreement at midnight on December 31st. Please confirm if you wish to proceed with security enforcement. 90 days past due. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Brad blinked. He shook his head slightly, as if trying to shake off a hallucination. He stepped closer to the screen, his polished dress shoes clicking on the hardwood floor. He reached out a trembling hand, almost touching the glass as if checking if it was real. 90 days, he whispered. His voice was hoarse, stripped of all its earlier arrogance. He turned around slowly. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at the guests. He looked straight at his wife. Vanessa was standing by the grand piano, clutching her champagne glass so tightly I thought it might shatter in her hand. Her face, usually flushed with the excitement of being the center of attention, was now a ghostly, ashen gray. She looked small. The sequins on her dress no longer looked like diamonds. They looked like cheap plastic trying too hard to shine. She tried to smile, a reflex action, but her lips only twitched nervously. Brad, she squeaked. Her voice was thin, high-pitched, terrified. Brad, honey, do not look at that. It is a trick. She is good with computers. I told you she hacked the system. Brad did not blink. He ignored her plea. He walked toward her, his movements stiff and mechanical. The crowd parted for him, sensing the violence radiating from him. It wasn't physical violence, but the emotional violence of a man whose entire world was collapsing. He stopped 2 feet in front of her. The room was so quiet you could hear the wind howling against the glass outside. Vanessa, Brad said, his voice dangerously low. Why does that email say we are 90 days past due? Vanessa took a step back, bumping into the piano. It makes a discordant sound. I do not know, she stammered. Maybe a clerical error? You know how banks are. A clerical error, Brad repeated. A clerical error is a misplaced decimal point. A clerical error is a wrong date. This says 90 days, Vanessa. 3 months. He took another step closer, invading her personal space. On the 1st of October, I transferred $15,000 to the joint account for the rent. On the 1st of November, I transferred another $15,000. On the 1st of December, I transferred $15,000 more. He held up 3 fingers, shaking them in her face. $45,000, Vanessa. That is $45,000 that left my business account. I saw the transaction logs. I signed the checks. He paused, breathing hard. His eyes were wide, searching her face for an answer, for a lifeline, for anything that would make sense of this nightmare. So if the building management did not get the money, and if Ebony here says she had to cover it to stop us from being kicked out. He let the sentence hang there unfinished. The implication was clear enough for everyone in the room to understand. Where is the money, Vanessa? The question cracked through the room like a whip. Vanessa looked around wildly, seeking an ally. She looked at her mother Viola, but even Viola looked confused and frightened now. She looked at her friends, but they were all studying their manicures or looking at the floor. I paid it, she lied, but the lie was weak. It lacked conviction. I sent the wire transfers. Maybe they got lost. Maybe Ebony intercepted them. Yes, that is it. She stole the money. I let out a short, dry laugh from my spot by the TV. I stole the money, I asked, cutting in. Vanessa, do you really want me to pull up the bank records for the joint account? Because I have access to those too? Since you know I had to co-sign for that account because your credit score was below 500. Vanessa flinched as if I had slapped her. Do you want me to show them the transaction history? I continued, my voice relentless. Do you want everyone to see the $5,000 charge at Hermes on October 2nd? Or the weekend trip to the Four Seasons on November 3rd? Or the cash withdrawals at the casino? Brad froze. He turned his head slowly to look at me, then whipped back to face his wife. Hermes, he whispered. The casino. Vanessa burst into tears. It was an ugly, desperate sound. No, I needed to look the part, Brad. You said image is everything. You said we needed to look successful to get the investors. I bought the bags for us, for the brand. Brad looked at her as if he was seeing a stranger. For the first time, he noticed the sapphire necklace around her neck, the designer shoes on her feet, the customized clutch in her hand. He looked at the trappings of wealth that she had draped herself in, and he realized they were not symbols of success. They were the tombstones of his company. You spent the rent money on clothes, he asked, his voice trembling with rage. You spent the money I scraped together, the money I borrowed against the company assets. Brad, please, she sobbed, reaching out to grab his tuxedo jacket. I was going to put it back. Once your Series A funding came through, I was going to pay it all back. There it is, I thought. The confession. Brad shoved her hands away. He looked disgusted. There is no Series A funding? Vanessa, he screamed, losing control completely. The deal isn't closed. Why do you think I needed this party to go perfectly? I needed the investors to see we were stable. I needed them to see the penthouse. He ran his hands through his hair, messing up the perfect gel style. He looked manic. And now they know we are being evicted. Now they know I am married to a thief. And they know my broke sister-in-law is actually the one pulling the strings. He laughed a hysterical, broken sound. He spun around to face the crowd, spreading his arms wide. Did you hear that, everyone? Did you hear the lady of the house? She spent $45,000 on handbags while we were living on charity. The guests were whispering furiously now. Phones were out. People were recording. This was better than any reality TV show. This was the destruction of a dynasty in real time. Vanessa sank to the floor, her dress pooling around her like spilled mercury. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. Mom, she wailed. Mom, make them stop. But Viola didn't move. She just stared at the screen, at the email that had destroyed her fantasy world. I walked over to the table where Brad had left his drink. I picked up the bottle of expensive scotch he had been bragging about earlier. I looked at the label. It was fake. Just like everything else in this house. I looked at Brad, who was now leaning against the piano, gasping for air. The email is real, Brad, I said softly. And so is the eviction. You have lost the apartment. You have lost the money. And I think, judging by the look on your investors' faces, you have just lost your company too. I pointed to the door. You have 10 minutes left before I call the police to escort you out. I suggest you start packing. And Brad, check your pockets. I think Vanessa might have pawned your watch too. Brad looked down at his wrist, panic flaring in his eyes again. The chaos was absolute, and I was just getting started. The glow of the television screen shifted from the stark white of the eviction email to the dull, bureaucratic gray of a credit card statement. It was a visual shift that caused a collective inhale throughout the room. The guests who had been whispering in shocked huddles fell silent again. They knew what a bank statement looked like. They knew that in a room full of people pretending to be richer than they were, a bank statement was the most dangerous document on earth. I stood by the screen, my posture rigid, my face impassive. I was no longer the sister. I was the auditor. I was the judge, the jury, and the executioner of their reputation. You might be wondering. I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. How the freelance computer girl has access to the private spending habits of the glamorous Vanessa Jenkins. I looked at my mother, who was clutching her chest, her face a mask of horror. I have this access because 3 years ago, when Vanessa maxed out her own cards and destroyed her credit score buying shoes she could not afford, she came to me. She begged me to co-sign for an American Express Platinum card. She said she needed it for business expenses. She said she needed it to build the brand. I turned my gaze to Brad. He was leaning against the piano looking like a man who had been punched in the gut. I am the guarantor, Brad. That means when the bill does not get paid, they call me. And for the last 3 months, while you thought you were paying rent, Vanessa was maxing out the limit I set for her. I raised my hand and pointed to the first line item highlighted in yellow on the giant screen. October 2nd, I read aloud. The numbers were crisp and damning. Hermes of Atlanta, $5,420. I paused, letting the figure sink in. $5,000. That was more than most people in Atlanta made in a month. That was the cost of the rent check that had never arrived. I looked at the floor by Vanessa's feet. There, sitting next to the piano leg, was a small, burnt orange handbag with gold hardware. It was the centerpiece of her outfit tonight. She had been showing it off to the senator's wife earlier, claiming it was a limited edition gift from a brand sponsor. That is a beautiful bag, Vanessa, I said, my voice dripping with cold admiration. Is that the Evelyn model? You told Mom that Brad bought it for you to celebrate a big contract. You told Brad it was a gift from a client. I looked at Brad. She lied to both of you. She bought it on a Tuesday morning using the money that was supposed to keep a roof over your head. She is carrying your eviction notice on her arm right now. Brad looked at the bag. He looked at it with pure hatred. I saw his hands clench into fists at his sides. He had been working 18-hour days, stressing about payroll while she was shopping. I swiped the screen again. The list scrolled down. November 10th, I continued relentless. The spa at the street. Regis, $3,100. A gasp rippled through the crowd. $3,000 for a spa day. Even the wealthy guests found that excessive. I remember November 10th, I said, tapping my chin thoughtfully. That was the day you told Brad you were at a networking conference for female entrepreneurs. You told him you were hustling for the business. I looked at the itemized breakdown on the screen: a diamond facial, a 4-hand massage, a seaweed wrap, and 3 bottles of champagne charged to the room. That is quite a conference, Vanessa. While I was paying your electric bill because you said you were short on cash, you were getting wrapped in seaweed and drinking Dom Perignon. Vanessa was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face, ruining her professional makeup. Stop it, she sobbed. You are twisting everything I needed to look good for the brand. Stress causes wrinkles. I did it for us. For us, I asked, my voice rising slightly. You stole $15,000 a month from your husband, ignored your rent, and spent it on facials. That isn't for us, Vanessa. That is for your vanity. That is for the empty hole inside you that no amount of money can fill. I swiped the screen one more time. This was the kill shot. This was the entry I had hesitated to show, not out of mercy, but because I knew it would cause damage that could never be repaired. But after the way they had treated me tonight, mercy was a luxury they could not afford. And then there is this, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried to the back of the room. December 5th, a Tuesday, 1:14 p.m. The entry on the screen was highlighted in red. The Ritz-Carlton downtown. Room service, $400, followed by a room charge for a partial day use. The room went deadly quiet. The implication of a midday hotel room charge in one's own city was universal. There was only one reason a married woman checked into the Ritz-Carlton at 1 p.m. on a Tuesday. I looked at Brad. He was staring at the screen, his face draining of all color. He looked like he was going to be sick. December 5th, I said, addressing Brad directly. Do you remember that day you were in San Francisco meeting with the venture capitalists? You were trying to save the company. You called me panicked because Vanessa wasn't answering her phone. I turned to Vanessa. She wasn't crying anymore. She was frozen in terror. You told him you were at church, Vanessa. You told him you were praying for his meeting. I pointed at the screen. Since when does the Ritz-Carlton offer prayer services that include oysters and a bottle of Pinot Noir for two? The sound that came out of Brad was not a word. It was a guttural noise, a sound of pure animal pain. He looked at Vanessa. The question in his eyes was clear. Who? Who was it? Vanessa shook her head frantically. No, no, Brad. It was a meeting. It was a business meeting. I met a potential investor. We just ordered lunch in a hotel room, Brad whispered. His voice cracked. You met an investor in a hotel room while I was begging for money in California. I watched the realization wash over him. It wasn't just the money. It wasn't just the lies. It was the humiliation. She hadn't just bankrupted him. She had emasculated him. She had used his money, the money he thought was paying for their home, to finance an afternoon tryst with someone else. I leaned back against the wall, crossing my arms. You took the rent money, I said, summarizing the evidence like a closing argument. You bought a bag to impress people you hate. You went to a spa to escape a life you do not work for. And you went to a hotel to betray the husband who has been drowning trying to keep you afloat. I looked at the crowd. They were looking at Vanessa with disgusted fascination. The veneer of the perfect family was gone. All that was left was a grifter in a sequined dress and a husband who had been played for a fool. She bought that lifestyle, Brad, I said softly. But she bought it with your dignity, and she put the bill in my name. I tapped the phone, turning the screen black. The darkness that followed felt final. I am done paying for it, Vanessa. The card is cancelled. The rent is cancelled. And I think, judging by the look on your husband's face, your marriage might be cancelled too. Brad pushed himself off the piano. He walked toward Vanessa. He didn't scream. He didn't hit her. He just reached out and grabbed the burnt orange Hermes bag from the floor. He looked at it for a second. Then he unzipped it. He turned it upside down. Lipstick, keys, and a phone clattered onto the hardwood floor. He threw the empty bag at her feet. Get out, he said. His voice was dead. Vanessa looked at the bag, then at him. Brad. I said get out, he roared, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. I watched from the side, my face impassive. The court was adjourned. The sentence had been passed. And the execution had begun. The bank statements were glowing on the screen like neon tombstones detailing every dollar of misappropriated funds. But denial is a powerful drug, especially when you are drinking vintage champagne and standing in a penthouse that costs more than most people earn in a decade. I could see the doubt lingering in the eyes of the guests. They looked at the screen, then back at Brad, then back at the screen. It was too much to process. It was too big of a lie. Brad saw the hesitation in the crowd, and he latched onto it like a drowning man grabbing a piece of driftwood. He stood up straighter, wiping the sweat from his forehead with a trembling hand. It is a simulation, he shouted, his voice cracking slightly, but gaining volume. She is doing a demo. Do not you see, she is a computer freelancer. She built a mirror site. He pointed a shaking finger at me. You are sick, Ebony. You built a fake banking portal just to ruin my party. You hacked the TV to show some Photoshop project. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. It was easier for them to believe that I was a crazy, vindictive hacker than to accept that they had been sipping drinks bought with stolen money. My mother, Viola, nodded vigorously, her eyes pleading with her friends to believe the lie. Yes, she chimed in, her voice shrill. She has always been good with computers. She is playing a trick, a cruel, twisted trick. I stood there listening to them rewrite reality in real time. I watched them cling to the illusion of their superiority. They needed Brad to be the rich CEO. They needed Vanessa to be the perfect socialite. Because if Brad and Vanessa were frauds, then maybe they were frauds too for believing them. I sighed. It was a deep, weary sound that was lost in the growing chatter of the room. Digital proof wasn't enough. They needed something visceral. They needed something they could feel on their skin. They needed a physical reminder of who actually held the power in this building. I looked down at my phone. The smart home application was already open. It was the master control panel for the entire penthouse. I had installed the system myself 2 years ago when I bought the place. I knew every sensor, every circuit, every automated feature. I saw the icons glowing green on my screen. Lighting, climate, security, automated fenestration. I looked up at Brad, who was now smiling nervously, thinking he had swayed the crowd back to his side. "You think this is a simulation, Brad?" I asked, my voice calm, but carrying across the room. "You think I am running a demo? I am sure of it," he scoffed, crossing his arms over his chest. "You are trying to scare us, but you forgot one thing. This is the real world. In the real world, I have the keys. I have the remote. You are just a girl with a laptop." I tapped the screen of my phone. I didn't hack anything, I didn't break any firewalls, I simply logged in as the administrator, the only administrator. Well, I said, keeping my eyes locked on his. "As the landlord, I have decided that the unit requires emergency maintenance." "Maintenance?" Vanessa asked, wiping her mascara-stained cheeks. "What are you talking about?" I tapped the icon labeled Master Lighting Control. I slid the dimmer bar from 100% down to 0. Immediately, the penthouse plunged into darkness. It wasn't a gradual dimming. It was an instant total blackout. The crystal chandeliers that had been casting warm, flattering light over the guests died. The accent lights highlighting the art on the walls vanished. Even the little lights on the digital thermostat winked out. Screams erupted from the crowd. It was the primal panic of people who are suddenly blind. I heard the crash of a glass shattering against the floor. I heard someone gasp. "What is happening?" my mother shrieked. "Brad, fix the lights." I stood perfectly still in the dark. My eyes adjusted quickly. The only light now came from the city skyline, outside the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, ghostly shadows across the room. Brad was fumbling for his phone, trying to turn on the flashlight. "It is a power outage," he yelled. "Everyone stay calm. It is just the grid." "No, Brad," I said from the darkness. My voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "The grid is fine. Look at the building across the street. Their lights are on." I tapped my phone screen again. The soft glow of my device illuminated my face from below, making me look like a ghost in the black void. I navigated to the climate control tab. The current internal temperature was set to a cozy 72 degrees. I tapped the power button. Off. Then I went to the automated blinds and windows section. This was the feature Brad loved the most. He loved showing off how the massive glass panels could retract to turn the living room into an open-air balcony. He usually did it on warm summer nights to impress investors. But tonight was not a summer night. It was New Year's Eve in Atlanta. A polar vortex had swept through the city that afternoon. The outside temperature was 20 degrees below freezing, with a wind chill that could cut through bone. I tapped the button labeled Full Open. A low mechanical hum filled the room. It was the sound of heavy-duty motors engaging. "What is that noise?" someone whispered. Suddenly, the wind hit us. The massive glass walls began to slide open. The barrier between the warm-scented fantasy world of the party and the brutal, freezing reality of the winter night dissolved. The wind didn't just blow in, it roared. It rushed into the penthouse like a physical blow, carrying with it snowflakes that swirled in the dark like angry white sparks. The temperature dropped 40 degrees in seconds. The screaming changed pitch. It went from confusion to physical distress. "Close it!" Vanessa screamed, her voice tearing at her throat. "Brad, close the windows." "It is freezing." I watched as the guests, who just moments ago were posing in their backless gowns and silk tuxedos, instantly crumbled. The cold was indiscriminate. It didn't care about their net worth. It didn't care about their status. It bit into their exposed skin with the sharpness of 1,000 needles. I saw the senator's wife wrapping her arms around herself. her teeth chattering so loud I could hear it over the wind. I saw my mother trying to pull a tablecloth off a table to wrap around her shoulders, knocking over a tray of shrimp in the process. Brad was frantically pressing buttons on the wall panel. "It is not working!" he yelled, his voice panic-stricken. "The manual override is locked out." "Of course it is locked out," I said. I was standing in the middle of the room, the wind whipping my hair around my face. But I wasn't shivering. I pulled the hood of my $800 cashmere hoodie up over my head. I shoved my hands into the deep, warm pockets. The thick, high-quality fabric that my mother had called a rag was now the only thing in the room that offered any protection. While they froze in their vanity, I stood in comfort. I walked slowly through the crowd. They parted for me not out of respect, but out of fear. I was the only stable thing in a world that had suddenly turned chaotic and hostile. I stopped near the open window, the snow swirling around my boots. I looked back at them. They looked like refugees in a war zone, huddled together, their expensive clothes useless against the elements. "You wanted to look rich," I shouted over the wind. "You wanted to show off the view. Well, here it is. This is the reality of living in a glass house that you do not own. When the owner decides to let the cold in you freeze." Vanessa was cowering behind the grand piano, her lips turning blue. "Please, Ebony," she begged, her teeth clattering. "Please close it. We will freeze to death." I looked at her. She looked pathetic. The golden child was shivering, her magic gone. I held up my phone. The screen was the only source of warmth in their eyes. "You told me to leave," I said. "You told me I didn't belong at the main table." "You were right. I belong in the control room." I tapped one more button on my screen. The security alarm. A deafening siren began to wail, a pulsing, ear-splitting sound that combined with the wind to create a symphony of absolute misery. "Eviction protocol initiated," I said calmly, though no one could hear me over the noise. I turned and walked toward the exit. The cold air felt fresh against my face. It felt like cleansing. Behind me, the perfect family was freezing, trapped in the dark, loudly learning the lesson that warmth, like respect, is something that can be taken away as easily as flipping a switch. The wind was now howling through the open floor-to-ceiling windows, carrying with it the biting chill of the Atlanta winter. The temperature in the penthouse had plummeted, turning the breath of the guests into small white clouds of vapor. But while everyone else was shivering from the cold, my mother Viola was shaking from something else entirely. It was a vibrating volcanic rage that had finally erupted after 30 years of dormancy. She looked at me standing there in my warm hoodie, holding the phone that controlled her entire universe, and she snapped. The mask of the composed high society matriarch fell away. She did not look like the wife of a successful man anymore. She looked feral. Her eyes were wide and bloodshot. Her perfectly sprayed hair was being whipped around by the wind, and her lips were pulled back in a snarl that revealed her expensive veneers. "You demon!" she screamed. The sound tore through the room, louder than the wind, louder than the confusion of the guests. She lunged at me. It happened in slow motion. I saw her hand reach out, her manicured claws hooking into the air, aiming straight for the phone in my hand. She did not want to hit me. She wanted to destroy the evidence. She wanted to smash the screen that was broadcasting the truth about her golden child. She wanted to silence the alarm I had triggered. "Give me that phone," she shrieked. "Stop this right now." She was fast, fueled by adrenaline and humiliation, but I was ready. I had spent a lifetime dodging her emotional blows. Dodging a physical one was instinctive. I did not step back. I did not cower. I simply pivoted on my heel, a smooth, calculated movement to the left, like a matador stepping aside for a charging bull. My mother's momentum betrayed her. Her hands grasped at empty air where my phone had been a second before. She stumbled forward, her high heels catching on the thick, expensive rug. She flailed, trying to find her balance, but it was too late. She crashed heavily onto the velvet sofa behind me, burying her face in the cushions. It was an undignified, clumsy fall that stripped away the last shred of her elegance. A gasp went through the room. To see Viola Williams, the woman who prided herself on never having a hair out of place, sprawling on a couch like a barroom brawler was shocking. She scrambled up immediately. Her face flushed a deep, blotchy red. She pointed a shaking finger at me, her chest heaving. "You are sick," she spat, her voice trembling with venom. "You are a sick, twisted girl. Look at what you are doing. You are destroying your sister's life. You are ruining her reputation in front of everyone who matters." She took a breath, and then she said the words I knew were coming, the words she had used to dismiss my pain since I was a child. "You are jealous," she screamed. "You have always been jealous. You cannot stand that Vanessa is happy. You cannot stand that she found love and success. You want what she has, and because you cannot have it, you want to burn it down." The word hung in the freezing air. Jealous. I looked at my sister, who was huddled in the corner sobbing over a fake handbag and a cheating husband. I looked at my brother-in-law, who was staring at the floor, a broken man with no company and no dignity, and then I looked at the eviction notice still glowing on the screen. I started to laugh. It was a cold, dry sound that had no humor in it. "Jealous?" I asked. My voice was low, but in the sudden silence of the room it carried to every corner. "You think I am jealous of this?" I gestured around the room. "I am jealous of a mortgage that isn't paid. I am jealous of a marriage built on lies and hotel room hookups. I am jealous of a closet full of clothes bought with stolen money." I stepped closer to the sofa where my mother sat, towering over her. "No, Mother, I am not jealous. I am disgusted. But you are right about one thing. I have always known exactly who you are. And I remember exactly when I stopped caring about your approval." I looked her dead in the eye. "Do you remember my 18th birthday?" I asked. Viola blinked. She looked confused by the shift in topic, but she didn't speak. "I remember it." I continued, my voice steady. "I had spent 2 years working double shifts at the Greasy Spoon Diner on 10th Street. I came home smelling like fry oil and despair every single night. I saved every penny. I did not buy clothes. I did not go to the movies. I saved because I wanted a car. I wanted freedom. I wanted to be able to drive myself to college so I wouldn't have to rely on you." The guests were listening intently now. This wasn't just a fight about money anymore. This was an autopsy of a family. "I bought that used Honda Civic with cash," I said. "It wasn't pretty. It had a dent in the bumper and the AC didn't work. But it was mine. I parked it in the driveway with so much pride I thought my heart would burst." I paused, letting the memory wash over me. The cold wind in the penthouse felt like the cold reality of that day. 2 weeks later, I came home from school and the car was gone. I saw my father Otis shift uncomfortably in his chair. He remembered. Of course he remembered. "I thought it had been stolen," I said. "I called you crying. I was frantic. And do you remember what you told me?" Mother Viola looked away. She picked at a loose thread on the sofa cushion. "You told me not to worry," I said, my voice hardening. "You said, 'We sold it, Ebony. We needed the money.' You told me it was for a family emergency," I continued. "You said we were in a financial bind. You made me feel selfish for even asking about the money. You told me I should be glad to contribute to the family's survival." I took a step closer, leaning down so my face was level with hers. "But it wasn't a financial bind, was it?" I turned to look at Vanessa. Her face was buried in her hands, but I knew she could hear me. "3 days after you sold my car, Vanessa came home with bandages on her face." A ripple of shock went through the crowd. "You sold my car? The car I scrubbed floors to buy to pay for Vanessa's nose job," I said. The words came out like bullets. "And you didn't even try to hide it." When I asked you, "Why do you remember what you said?" Viola stayed silent. Her jaw locked tight. "You said Vanessa needs this," I quoted, mimicking her dismissive tone perfectly. "You said, she is depressed about her profile. She needs to look refined to get into a good sorority. She needs to fix her nose so she can find a husband." I stood up straight, addressing the room. "Refined, that is the word she used. Because my sister's nose, the nose she inherited from our grandfather, was too wide, it was too ethnic, it was too black for my mother's taste. So she stole my hard work, she stole my property, to surgically erase our heritage from my sister's face." I looked back at my mother. You didn't sell my car because we were poor. You sold it because you valued Vanessa's vanity more than you valued my labor. You taught me that day that my only purpose in this family is to be a resource for her. I am the battery you drained to keep her shining. I pointed at the eviction notice on the screen. Well, guess what, Mother? The battery is dead. I am not jealous. I am exhausted. I am exhausted by the lies. I am exhausted by the theft. And I am exhausted by the fact that you would look me in the eye and call me the villain when I have been the only one keeping the lights on in this house for 3 years. My mother began to sob. It wasn't the fake, delicate crying she used to get her way. It was the ugly, heaving sobbing of a woman who had been stripped naked in front of her peers. I wanted her to have a good life, Viola stammered. I wanted her to marry well. She did marry well, I shouted, gesturing to Brad. She married a man who tried. She married a man who started a company. But you and your obsession with image destroyed him too. You taught her that looking rich is more important than being rich. You taught her to spend money she didn't have. You created this monster. I took a deep breath, the cold air filling my lungs. You didn't want her to have a good life, I said quietly. You wanted her to be your doll. You wanted a trophy daughter to show off at church, and you sacrificed me to build her pedestal. I turned away from her. I looked at the guests who were shivering in their furs. The show is over, I said. My mother is right. I am a demon. I am the demon of consequences. And I have finally come to collect. The wind howling through the open windows had turned the penthouse into an icebox, but the heat radiating from my brother-in-law Brad was enough to melt the snow settling on the hardwood floors. He had watched his wife crumble. He had watched his mother-in-law be exposed as a thief. He had watched his own reputation as a provider disintegrate in front of the city's elite. Most men would have retreated. Most men would have accepted defeat and walked out into the cold. But Brad was not most men. He was a man built entirely on ego, a man who believed that if you just shouted loud enough and threw enough money at a problem, reality would bend to your will. He stepped away from the piano, pushing past a shivering waiter. He pulled his phone out of his pocket and turned on the flashlight again. The beam cut through the darkness, shaking slightly as he aimed it at his own chest, illuminating himself like the hero in a bad action movie. With his other hand, he reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket and withdrew a long rectangular book bound in leather. It was his corporate checkbook, the holy grail of his self-worth. Enough, Brad roared. His voice cracked, but he forced it lower, trying to regain the command he had lost. He marched toward me, the flashlight beam bouncing off the walls. "This is ridiculous," he announced to the room, turning his back on me to address the guests. "My sister-in-law is clearly having a mental breakdown. She is inventing stories about nose jobs and stolen cars because she is bitter. But I am a businessman. I deal in solutions." He turned back to face me, slapping the checkbook against his open palm. The sound was sharp like a pistol crack. "You want money, Ebony? Is that what this is about? You want a handout. You want to squeeze us for cash because you are failing at whatever little freelance job you have." He didn't wait for an answer. He clicked a pen open. "Fine," he spat. "I will play your game. You say you own this apartment. You say we are trespassing. Name your price." He opened the checkbook using his thigh as a table. My company Tech Brad was just valued at $10 million in our Series A pre-evaluation, he declared, making sure his voice carried to the senator standing in the corner. 10 million. Do you know what that means, Ebony? It means I can buy and sell you 10 times over before breakfast. He scribbled something on the check. "I am writing you a check right now for $2 million, he said, tearing the slip of paper from the book with a flourish. 2 million. That is double what this place is worth. I am buying the unit. Right now. Cash deal." He held the check out to me, the paper fluttering in the freezing wind. "Take it," he sneered. "Take it and get out of my house. Go buy yourself a life. Go buy yourself some new clothes. Just leave us alone." The room went silent, save for the wind. The guest looked at the check. I saw greed flicker in my mother's eyes. $2 million. It was a number that solved everything. It was a number that restored order. For a second, Brad looked triumphant. He thought he had won. He thought he had slapped me with his wallet and put me back in my place. And that was when I started to laugh. It wasn't a chuckle. It wasn't a giggle. It was a full, deep, resonant laugh that bubbled up from my chest and echoed off the glass walls. It was the first time I had laughed in that house in 10 years. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated amusement. Brad faltered. The check in his hand lowered slightly. "Why are you laughing?" he demanded. $2 million is a joke to you." I wiped a tear from my eye, shaking my head. "Oh, Brad," I said, my voice rich with mirth. "I am not laughing at the number. I am laughing at the paper." I took a step closer to him, ignoring the check he was thrusting in my face. "You are offering me a check from your business account?" I asked. "Yes," he said, puffing out his chest. "Tech Brad Ventures. It is a solvent, high-growth entity." I looked at him with the pity one might show a child trying to pay for a Ferrari with Monopoly money. "Brad," I said softly, "which account is that linked to? Is it the Chase Bank business checking account? The one ending in 4598? Brad froze. His eyes narrowed. "How do you know my account number?" I ignored the question. I pulled up a file on my mental hard drive, a file I had memorized this morning when I was reviewing the risk assessment for my portfolio. "I am asking because I am curious." I continued, circling him like a shark. "If I take that check to the bank tomorrow morning, what do you think the teller will say?" "She will cash it," Brad insisted, though his voice wavered. "Will she?" I asked. "Because according to the real-time liquidity report I ran at 4 p.m. today, the balance in the Tech Brad Chase account isn't $2 million. I stopped walking and stood directly in front of him. I leaned in close, so only he and the people in the front row could hear the death blow. "The balance is negative $50,420.16. Brad's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "You are in overdraft, Brad," I whispered. "You have been in overdraft for 3 weeks. The bank has already sent a notice of closure. You have $50,000 in bounced vendor payments, unpaid server fees, and coincidentally charges for a private jet membership you clearly cannot afford." I looked at the check in his hand. It was worthless. It was less than worthless. It was a piece of paper that promised a felony charge for fraud. "If I take that check, Brad," I said, raising my voice so the room could hear, "I won't get $2 million. I will get a notification that the account is frozen, and you will get a visit from the district attorney for writing bad checks over the grand larceny limit." The guests gasped. The image of the millionaire CEO evaporated instantly, replaced by the reality of a desperate man writing checks his ego couldn't cash. "You are lying," Brad stammered, backing away. The funding is coming in. The wire is pending." "There is no wire, Brad," I said, my voice hard. "There is no Series A. Your lead investor pulled out last week because your due diligence failed. Your books are a mess. You are bleeding cash. You are not a CEO. You are a broke man in a rented tuxedo standing in an apartment you do not own, trying to buy me off with money that does not exist." I reached out and plucked the check from his trembling fingers. I looked at it. His signature was large and looped, a signature practiced to look important. I ripped the check in half. Then I ripped it again. I let the pieces fall to the floor where the wind caught them and scattered them like confetti at a funeral. "Paper cannot fix a deficit of character, Brad," I said. "And it certainly cannot fix a deficit of $50,000. Brad looked at the torn paper on the floor. He looked at his hands. He looked destroyed. But he had one card left to play. The only card a narcissist has when reality corners him. He had to blame someone else. He had to find a savior. He pulled his phone out again. His fingers were shaking so bad, he almost dropped it. I am calling him, he muttered, his eyes wild. I am calling Mr. X, my angel investor. He believes in me. He will vouch for me. He will transfer the funds right now. You will see. You will all see. I watched him dial. I watched him put the phone to his ear on speaker mode. I watched him wait for the ring. I stood there in the dark, my hand in my hoodie pocket, my fingers wrapped around my own phone. Go ahead, Brad, I thought. Call your savior. Call the man who has been keeping your company alive. Call the mysterious investor you have never met in person. Because when that phone rings, Brad, you are going to realize that the person you are calling is standing right in front of you. And she is not picking up. The pieces of the torn check lay scattered on the hardwood floor, like fallen leaves in a dead winter. For a moment, Brad stared at them, his brain trying to comprehend that his $2 million gesture had just been ripped into confetti. The humiliation should have crushed him. It should have sent him running for the elevator. But narcissism is a powerful shield. Instead of shame, I saw a terrifying shift in his eyes. It was the desperate manic gleam of a gambler who had lost his house, but was convinced he could win it all back with one final reckless bet. He threw his head back and laughed. It was a loud, jagged sound that bounced off the glass walls, making the shivering guests flinch. You think you are smart, Ebony? He shouted, stepping over the debris of his check. You think because I have a cash flow issue with one bank account you have won? You think you can embarrass me in front of the senator, in front of my family? He reached into his tuxedo pocket again. This time he did not pull out a checkbook. He pulled out his phone. It was the latest model, encased in leather, a symbol of the status he desperately craved. You forgot who I am, he announced to the room, his voice booming with renewed arrogance. I am the CEO of TechBrad Ventures. I am a visionary, and visionaries do not rely on local banks. We rely on angel investors. We rely on the heavy hitters. He held the phone up like a weapon. I have a silent partner, Ebony, a man who has been funding my operations for 3 years. A man who believes in me even when small-minded people like you do not. He is billionaire status. He is the kind of money you only read about in magazines. We call him Mr. X because he values his privacy, but he values my genius even more. I stood perfectly still, my hands in the pockets of my hoodie. The wind from the open window whipped my hair across my face, hiding the small, cold smile that was forming on my lips. Go ahead, Brad, I said softly, though the wind carried my voice straight to him. Call him. I will call him, Brad. Spat. I will call him right now. And I am going to put it on speaker so everyone in this room can hear what real power sounds like. I am going to ask him for an emergency transfer of $5 million. And do you know what he is going to say? He is going to say yes, because he knows that betting on Brad Jenkins is a guaranteed win. The crowd watched in breathless anticipation. This was the Hail Mary pass. If Brad really had a billionaire backer, the tables could turn again. My mother, Viola, looked up from the sofa where she had been crying, a glimmer of hope returning to her eyes. If Brad had a savior, maybe her reputation could still be salvaged. Brad unlocked his phone. His fingers were trembling, but he forced them to be steady as he scrolled through his contacts. He found the name. I knew exactly what it looked like on his screen because I had programmed the contact card myself 3 years ago on a burner phone he had given me to fix. The entry simply read, "The Investor." He tapped the call icon. He tapped the speaker button. He held the phone out in front of him like a priest holding a holy relic. The sound of the ringback tone filled the silent, freezing room. Brrring. Brad looked at me, a sneer curling his lip. Get ready to beg for forgiveness, Ebony. When he picks up, I'm going to tell him everything. I'm going to tell him you are harassing me. I might even have him buy this entire building just to evict you. Brrring. The second ring echoed. The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone was leaning forward, waiting for a deep, authoritative male voice to answer and save the day. Brrring. And then a sound cut through the room. It did not come from Brad's phone. It came from the pocket of my hoodie. It was not a standard ringtone. It was not a melody. It was a sharp, distinct metallic sound that everyone in the room recognized instantly. Ka-ching. It was the sound of an old-fashioned cash register opening. The universal sound of money. Brad frowned. He looked around the room annoyed. "Who is that? Turn off your phones, I am making a business call." He looked back at his own screen. The call was still connecting. Brrring. Ka-ching. The sound happened again, perfectly synchronized with the ring on Brad's phone. Ka-ching. Brad blinked. He looked at me. For the first time, a flicker of confusion crossed his face. He saw me standing there, unmoving, my eyes locked on his. Brrring. Ka-ching. I slowly pulled my right hand out of my pocket. In my palm sat my phone. The screen was lighting up the dark space between us. Brad stared at my phone. He stared at his phone. He looked at the connection timer on his screen. He looked at my mother. She had covered her mouth with her hands. She had figured it out. He looked at the senator. The senator was shaking his head, looking at the floor in second-hand embarrassment. "No," Brad whispered. His voice was barely audible. "No. That is impossible." He lowered his phone slightly, but the speaker was still on. Brrring. Ka-ching. I swiped my thumb across my screen. The green answer button slid to the right. On Brad's phone, the ringing stopped. The timer started counting upward. 0001, 0002. The connection was made. The room was so quiet that you could hear the electronic hiss of the open line coming from Brad's speaker. I lifted my phone to my ear. I did not break eye contact with him. I watched the color drain from his face until he looked like a corpse standing upright. I spoke into my phone, but I did not need to. My voice rang out from the speaker in his hand, creating a terrifying stereo effect. My real voice and my electronic voice speaking in perfect unison. "Hello, Brad," I said. Brad dropped his hand as if the phone had suddenly turned red hot. He didn't drop it, but he lowered it, staring at the device as if it were a bomb. "You," he choked out. "You?" "Yes," I said into the phone. The voice from his speaker echoed back, cold and distorted. "This is Mr. X. Or should I say, Miss X?" Brad took a step back. He shook his head violently. "No. No, I have spoken to him. I have spoken to the investor. He is a man. He has a deep voice. He sends me emails." I tapped a button on my screen. It was a voice modulation app I had installed years ago. I toggled it on. I spoke again. "Hello, Brad. Is the quarterly report ready?" The voice that came out of Brad's speaker was deep, gravelly, and undeniably masculine. It was the voice of the man he had worshipped for 3 years. It was the voice of the man he had tried to impress. It was the voice of the man he thought was his friend. I toggled the app off. "I am the investor, Brad," I said, my own voice returning. "I am the one who approved your seed funding. I am the one who signed off on your office lease. I am the one who has been reading your pathetic monthly updates where you lie about your sales figures." Brad fell to his knees. It wasn't a figure of speech. His legs simply gave out. He collapsed onto the hardwood floor, the phone still clutched in his hand, the speaker still broadcasting my voice. "Why?" he sobbed. "Why would you do that?" "Because you are family," I said, and the word tasted like ash in my mouth. "Because 3 years ago when you started this company, nobody else believed in you. The banks laughed at you. My parents didn't have the money. Vanessa was already spending more than you made. I saw you struggling. I saw you trying. And despite everything, despite how you treated me, I wanted you to succeed. I thought if you succeeded, you might finally be happy. And if you were happy, maybe you would be kind." I walked over to where he was kneeling. I looked down at him. "I set up a shell company. I hired a lawyer to be the front man. I poured my savings into your dream, Brad. I gave you wings. I leaned down, bringing my face close to his. And how did you thank me? You mocked me. You told me to go scrub feet. You told me I was worthless while you were wearing a watch bought with my money. You sat at my table, drank my wine, and spit in my face. Brad looked up at me. There were tears in his eyes, but I felt nothing. The funds, he whispered. You said there were funds pending. I stood up straight. I looked at the phone in my hand. I am glad you called, Brad, because I have been meaning to give you an official update on your application for emergency capital. I spoke clearly into the phone so his speaker would broadcast it to the entire room, regarding the request for $5 million from Tech Brad Ventures. I paused. The silence stretched. Application denied, I said. I pressed the red button on my screen. The call ended. A sharp click echoed from Brad's phone, followed by the dial tone. He stayed on his knees staring at the blank screen. The angel investor was gone. The money was gone. The illusion was gone. All that was left was a man kneeling before the woman he had called a failure, realizing too late that she was the god of his small, fragile world. The dial tone from the disconnected call hummed in the freezing air, a monotonous sound that signaled the end of Brad's world. His hand, which had been holding the phone up like a trophy just moments ago, finally gave way. The device slipped from his sweat-slicked fingers and hit the hardwood floor with a dull, heavy thud. He did not look down. He could not look down. His eyes were locked on mine, wide and unblinking, filled with a horror that went beyond bankruptcy. It was the horror of a man whose entire reality had been inverted in a single heartbeat. For 3 years, Brad had walked through life believing he was the predator and I was the prey. He believed his gender and his skin color gave him a natural right to rule, while my silence and my hoodie were signs of submission. Now his brain was trying to process the impossible truth that the god he prayed to for money, the mysterious Mr. X who held the keys to his destiny, was the same woman he had told to go scrub feet. You, he wheezed. The word came out like a bubble of blood. You are the investor. I did not answer him. I did not need to. The power dynamic had shifted so violently that words were no longer our primary currency. Action was. I reached into my bag, the cheap canvas tote he had mocked earlier, and pulled out my iPad Pro. The screen lit up, casting a cool blue glow on my face. To him, it must have looked like I was holding the nuclear launch codes. In a way, I was. I tapped the screen, opening the admin portal for Tech Brad Ventures. Brad watched my finger hover over the glass. He flinched as if I were pointing a loaded gun at his chest. What are you doing? He whispered, his voice trembling. Ebony, wait, please. Let's talk about this. We are family. I looked up from the screen. My expression was bored, clinical. Family? I asked. Interesting choice of words. Was I family when you made me sit at the children's table? Was I family when you told your friends I was a charity case? I looked back down at the iPad. No, Brad. Tonight we are not family. Tonight we are strictly business partners. And as the majority shareholder, I have identified a critical failure in executive leadership. I tapped the first button. Motion to dissolve board of directors, effective immediately. I announced, my voice calm and robotic. Motion passed. You are fired, Brad. Brad let out a strangled cry. You cannot fire me. It is my company. My name is on the door. Your name is on the marketing, I corrected. My money is on the lease. And my money is on the payroll. And since you have violated the morality clause of our contract by using company funds for personal luxury, I am exercising my right to a hostile takeover. I tapped the second button. This one triggered a cascade of automated emails to the bank, the payroll provider, and the vendors. Accounts frozen, I said, reading the confirmation pop-up. All corporate credit cards have been deactivated. The line of credit is revoked. The company servers are being remotely wiped as we speak to protect my intellectual property. Brad scrambled to his feet, swaying like a drunkard. He grabbed his chest, hyperventilating. You are killing me, he gasped. You are destroying everything I built. You didn't build it. I shouted, my voice finally rising, cracking like a whip. You spent it. I built it. I funded it. I saved it. You just played dress up in a CEO costume that I paid for. He froze, stripping of his last defense. The guests were watching him with open pity now, which for a narcissist like Brad was worse than hatred. He looked at the senator begging for an intervention, but the senator deliberately turned his back and began examining a painting on the wall. Brad was alone. But I wasn't done. There was one last symbol of his toxic pride that needed to be dismantled. I looked at the car keys clipping to his belt loop. The keys to the Porsche 911 GT3 he had driven here tonight. The car he parked right in front of the entrance so everyone would see it. The car he told everyone was a bonus for his genius. Nice car, Brad, I said, nodding toward his waist. He instinctively covered the keys with his hand. It is mine, he snarled. The company lease is in my name. You cannot touch it. Actually, I said, scrolling to the asset management tab on my iPad. The lease is in the name of TechBrad Ventures. And since I just dissolved the current leadership for gross misconduct, I have reported that vehicle as misappropriated. I tapped the final button. The screen flashed red. Stolen, I clarified. Brad's eyes bulged. What, I just filed a police report for Grand Theft Auto, I said, checking the time. Since you are no longer the CEO, and you are currently in possession of a $200,000 corporate asset without authorization, you are technically driving a stolen vehicle. I pointed toward the open window, where the sound of sirens was beginning to wail in the distance, cutting through the winter wind. Do you hear that, Brad? I asked. That isn't the wind. That is the Atlanta Police Department. They take car theft very seriously in this zip code, especially when the suspect is a man with a negative bank balance and a history of fraud. The sound of the sirens grew louder. The reality of prison, of handcuffs, of real consequences crashed into him. This was the moment his toxic masculinity finally shattered. All night he had tried to be the alpha male. He had tried to dominate me with his height, his voice, his money, and his gender. He had tried to make me feel small so he could feel big. But now, stripped of his title, his money, and his car, he was just a scared little boy. He didn't scream. He didn't fight. He simply crumbled. His knees hit the floor with a bone-jarring crack. He slumped forward, his hands gripping his hair, pulling at the roots. A low, keening wail escaped his throat. It was the sound of a man mourning his own ego. Please, he sobbed, his face pressed against the floorboards. Ebony, please, do not send me to jail. I cannot go to jail. I will do anything. I will beg. Look, I am begging. He crawled toward me. He actually crawled. The man who had told me to learn how to scrub feet was now on his hands and knees, dragging himself toward my boots. Call them off, he pleaded, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the snot running from his nose. Tell them it was a mistake. I will sign whatever you want. I will leave town. Just do not let them arrest me. Please. I am scared. I looked down at him. I looked at the top of his head, at the expensive gel in his hair, at the tuxedo that was now stained with dust. I felt no satisfaction. I felt no joy. I just felt a profound sense of closure. I stepped back, ensuring his hands could not touch my shoes. I cannot call them off, Brad. I said, my voice devoid of pity. I am just a freelancer. I do not have that kind of power. You said it yourself. Leave the big decisions to the men. I turned off my iPad and slipped it back into my bag. Well, the men are downstairs, Brad, and they have handcuffs with your name on them. Brad collapsed, completely curling into a fetal ball on the floor, weeping uncontrollably as the elevator chimed, announcing the arrival of the police. The king was dead, and the queen had not even broken a sweat. The sobbing of a broken man on the floor was a pathetic soundtrack to the end of the evening, but it was the silence of the room that told the real story. The wind was still whipping through the open windows, freezing the tears on my sister's face and rattling the crystals of the chandelier, but the social climate had shifted faster than the weather. I stood there, the iPad tucked back into my bag, watching a fascinating phenomenon take place. It was the great migration of the opportunists. Minutes ago, these people, the elite of Atlanta, the tech moguls, the politicians, the socialites, had been clustered around Brad and Vanessa like moths to a flame. They had laughed at his jokes, they had complimented her stolen wardrobe, they had looked at me with the disdain reserved for something stuck to the bottom of a shoe. But now the flame was extinguished. Brad was not a CEO. He was a criminal suspect curled in a fetal position. Vanessa was not a queen. She was a fraud, shivering in a dress she couldn't afford. And like rats sensing the ship was taking on water, the guests began to scurry. I watched them physically recoil from the couple. It was subtle at first. A step back here, a turned shoulder there. The circle of admiration that had surrounded my family dissolved, leaving them isolated on the cold hardwood floor. But the guests didn't just leave. That would have been too simple. That would have implied they had shame. No, these were people who survived by attaching themselves to power. And they had just realized that the power in the room had shifted to the woman in the black hoodie. The movement started slowly, a few whispers exchanged behind cupped hands, meaningful glances thrown in my direction. And then the approach began. The first to break rank was Senator Davis. He was a man I had admired from afar for his policies, a man whose campaign I had actually donated to anonymously. Earlier tonight, when I walked in, he had looked right through me to shake Brad's hand. He had chuckled when Vanessa made the joke about the doggy bag. Now he adjusted his silk tie, smoothed the front of his tuxedo, and walked toward me with a practiced oily smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ms. Williams," he began, his voice booming with a false warmth that made my skin crawl. He extended a hand, ignoring the fact that I kept mine firmly in my pockets. "I must say this has been a most revealing evening, truly vivid." He stepped closer, invading my personal space, smelling of expensive scotch and hypocrisy. "I had no idea you were the silent force behind Tech Brad Ventures," he continued, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Your strategy regarding the liquidity crisis was aggressive but brilliant, truly brilliant. It is rare to see that kind of decisiveness in the current market." I stared at him. I didn't blink. I didn't speak. I just let him drown in his own words. He cleared his throat, sensing the awkwardness but powering through it like a true politician. "You know, my committee is currently looking for minority-owned firms to consult on the new downtown redevelopment initiative. It is $100 million contract. We need minds like yours, people who understand the hard numbers." He reached into his breast pocket. It was a reflex I knew well. The business card maneuver. The universal sign that you had been deemed worthy of their time. He pulled out a heavy cream-colored card with gold embossing. He held it out to me with two hands as if it were a sacred offering. "Take my card, Ebony. Can I call you Ebony? Let's get lunch next week. The Capitol Grill, my treat. We can clear up any misunderstandings about this evening and discuss how we can partner up." I looked at the card. I looked at his hopeful, greedy face. Then I looked past him to the others who were waiting in line. There was the tech CEO who had rolled his eyes at me earlier. There was the socialite who had guarded her purse when I walked by. They were all clutching their business cards, ready to pivot, ready to rewrite history, ready to pretend they hadn't spent the last 3 hours treating me like garbage. They thought I was one of them now. They thought money washed away sins. They thought that because I had revealed my bank account, I would be desperate for their validation. They thought I would be flattered that the great Senator Davis finally wanted to buy me lunch. I slowly took one hand out of my pocket. The senator's smile widened. He thought he had closed the deal. I reached out and took the card from his fingers. The paper felt expensive. It felt like the kind of paper used to print lies. I held it up to the light, inspecting it like a jeweler inspecting a diamond. "The Capitol Grill." I asked, my voice flat. "Yes, yes," the senator beamed. "Their dry-aged steak is excellent." "I see," I said. Then slowly and deliberately I tore the card in half. The sound was sharp and final, like a bone snapping. The senator's smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of utter shock. His mouth opened, but no words came out. I put the two halves together and tore them again. And again. I shredded his contact information, his status, and his offer until it was nothing but a pile of cream-colored confetti in my palm. I opened my hand and let the pieces flutter to the floor where they mixed with the torn remains of Brad's worthless check. "We will not be getting lunch, Senator," I said, my voice rising so the people behind him could hear. "And there is no misunderstanding. I understood you perfectly when you laughed at my sister's jokes. I understood you perfectly when you watched a security guard try to block me and said nothing. I understood you perfectly when you judged me by my hoodie instead of my character." I looked at the line of people behind him. I saw them freezing, tucking their own business cards back into their pockets, realizing they had miscalculated. "Do not bother," I announced to the room. "Keep your cards, keep your projects, keep your fake apologies." I took a step forward, and the senator actually took a step back, fear flickering in his eyes. "You did not respect me when I walked in here," I said, my voice cold as the wind. "You laughed. You mocked. You punched down because you thought it was safe. And now that you know I have money, suddenly I am brilliant. Suddenly I am a partner." I shook my head, a look of pure disgust on my face. "That is not respect. That is hunger. You are scavengers. You smell money and you come running. But I do not feed scavengers. And I certainly do not do business with people who lack basic human decency." I pointed toward the elevator doors, which were currently dinging to signal the arrival of the police. "Brad and Vanessa are leaving in handcuffs," I said. "But the rest of you, you are leaving with your shame." I gestured to the open door. "Get out," I commanded. "Get out of my penthouse. Get out of my sight. And do not ever let me see you trying to shake my hand again." The room froze for a second, suspended in the absolute authority of my voice. And then the stampede began. The dignity of the elite evaporated. They didn't walk. They scrambled. They pushed past each other to get to the exit, desperate to escape the freezing wind and the burning gaze of the woman they had underestimated. They stepped over Brad without looking down. They ignored Vanessa's wails. They fled like roaches when the lights turned on, leaving me standing alone in the center of the room, the master of my own domain, watching the trash take itself out. The stampede of the elite had left the penthouse in a state of eerie quiet, broken only by the whistling of the wind through the open windows. The guests were gone, taking their judgment and their business cards with them. All that remained were the ruins of a family that had been built on a foundation of sand. My father Otis, who had spent the last hour shrinking into his chair, finally decided it was time to play the role of the patriarch. He stood up, adjusting his jacket, trying to summon a dignity he had forfeited years ago. "Ebony," he said, his voice shaking but loud. "That is enough. You have made your point. You have embarrassed your sister. You have ruined her husband. Are you happy now? We are family. We need to stop this madness and fix this before it goes any further." He took a step toward me, holding his hands out in a gesture of peace. "Put the phone away," he commanded softly. "Turn the lights back on. Let's sit down and talk about how we can repair this." I did not look at him. I did not acknowledge his request for peace. My eyes were locked on a single point of blue light shimmering in the darkness. It was the sapphire pendant resting against Vanessa's throat. I walked past my father as if he were a ghost. I stopped directly in front of my sister. She was still on the floor, her makeup streaked with tears, clutching her knees. When she saw me approach, she flinched, expecting another blow to her ego. "That necklace," I said. My voice was barely a whisper, but it was colder than the air rushing in from outside. Vanessa reached up instinctively to cover the jewel with her hand. "What?" "The sapphire," I said, pointing at her chest. "Take it off." Vanessa looked at me with confusion, then anger. "No, this is mine. Brad gave it to me for our 5th anniversary. It is the only thing I have left." I looked at Brad, who was still curled in a ball on the floor. "Did he?" I asked. "Did Brad buy you a custom cut 3-carat cashmere sapphire?" I turned my gaze to my mother, Viola. She was still sitting on the sofa, but she had stopped crying. She was staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. She knew. She knew exactly what I was looking at. Tell her mother, I said. Tell her where that necklace actually came from. Viola swallowed hard. She looked away. I do not know what you are talking about. Brad bought it. Liar, I spat. The word cracked through the room. I turned back to Vanessa. Do you remember Grandma Dorothy? I asked. Do you remember the only person in this family who didn't care about skin color? The only person who loved us equally? Vanessa nodded slowly. When I got my first big bonus from the hedge fund, I bought that necklace for her, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I spent 6 months searching for that specific stone because it matched her eyes. I gave it to her on her 80th birthday. She wore it every single day. She was wearing it in the hospital bed when she died. I took a breath, fighting back the tears that were threatening to fall. After the funeral, it went missing. The nurse said she had handed the personal effects bag to you, Mother. But when I asked you for it, you said it was lost. You said the undertaker must have stolen it. You let me believe that a stranger had robbed our grandmother's corpse. I pointed a shaking finger at Viola. But it wasn't a stranger. It was you. You went through your own dead mother's belongings before her body was even cold. You saw something expensive and you took it. And then you gave it to Vanessa because you thought she deserved to shine more than I deserved, to remember the woman who loved me. The room was silent with horror. Even Otis looked at his wife with disgust. Theft was one thing. Stealing from the dead from your own mother was a level of depravity that was hard to comprehend. Viola Otis whispered, "Tell me you didn't." Viola said nothing. She just stared at the floor, defeated. "Take it off, Vanessa," I commanded, holding out my hand. "That necklace represents love. And there is no love in this room. There is only greed. Take it off, or I will have the police add grave robbery to the list of charges tonight." Vanessa's hands were trembling so badly she couldn't work the clasp. She tugged at it, sobbing, until finally it came loose. She dropped the heavy blue stone into my palm. It felt cold. It felt heavy. But as I closed my fingers around it, I felt the first true warmth I had felt all night. I had taken back the house. I had taken back the money. And now I had taken back the memory of the only person who had ever believed I was worthy. The sapphire necklace was safe in my pocket, its cold weight a reminder of the justice I had finally claimed. But I was not done. The financial debts were settled. The stolen property was recovered. But there was one debt left to address. It was a debt of potential, a debt of a life I was supposed to live, but was stolen from me by the very man who was supposed to protect my future. I turned my attention to my father. Otis was standing by the fireplace, his hand resting on the mantel as if he needed it to hold him up. He looked old, he looked tired, but I felt no sympathy. I only felt the jagged edge of a memory that had cut me every day for 14 years. I reached into my wallet. This time, I did not pull out a digital device. I did not pull out a bank statement. I pulled out a piece of paper. It was folded into a tiny square worn soft at the creases. It was yellowed with age, and if you looked closely, you could see where clear tape had been carefully applied to hold it together after it had been torn in half. I unfolded it slowly. The sound of the dry, brittle paper crinkling was the only noise in the room. "Do you know what this is, Dad?" I asked, holding it up. Otis squinted. He leaned forward. And then I saw the recognition hit him like a physical blow. His face went gray. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He took a step back, shaking his head. "No," he whispered. "I got rid of that." "Yes," I said. "You did. You tore it in half and you buried it at the bottom of the kitchen trash can on a rainy Tuesday in April. You thought I was at school. You thought I would never see it." I smoothed the paper out. The crimson crest of Harvard University was faded but still visible. "You told me I didn't get in." I said, my voice trembling with a rage I had suppressed for over a decade. You watched me run to the mailbox every day for months. You watched me cry when April passed and nothing came. You held me while I wept, and you told me, "It is okay, Ebony. Maybe you just were not smart enough. Maybe you aimed too high. You should just stay here and work." I walked toward him. He shrank away from me. "But I was smart enough, wasn't I?" "Dad," I asked. "This letter says, 'Welcome to the class of 2008. It says I was accepted with a full academic scholarship." I stopped in front of him, holding the letter to his chest. "Why?" I asked. "Why did you hide it?" Otis looked down. He couldn't meet my eyes. We couldn't afford the flight," he mumbled. "We couldn't afford the dorm deposit." "Liar," I said softly. "You hid it because if I went to Boston, I would stop working at the diner. You hid it because you needed my paycheck to cover the lease on Vanessa's new car. You hid it because you needed a workhorse to support your show pony." I looked over at Vanessa, who was still weeping on the floor. "You cut my wings, Dad," I said, the tears finally spilling over. "You looked at your brilliant, ambitious daughter, and you decided to clip her wings so you could use her feathers to line Vanessa's nest. You tried to ground me so I would never leave you." I wiped my face with the back of my hand. "But you forgot one thing about me, Dad. You forgot that I do not need your permission to fly. I found this letter in the trash. I taped it back together. And I kept it in my wallet every single day as a reminder of who you really are. I didn't go to Harvard. I went to the state library. I taught myself to code. I taught myself finance. I flew anyway. I gestured to the penthouse, to the city lights, to the empire I had built from the shadows. I flew higher than you could ever comprehend." I looked down at Vanessa, who was curled in a ball, defeated and broken. "You sacrificed my future to pave the road for her," I said, delivering the final verdict. "But look at her now. You gave her everything. You gave her my money, my love, and my opportunities. And despite all of that, she is still crawling." The silence in the penthouse was shattered by a sound I had never heard before. It was the sound of a human spirit snapping completely in two. Vanessa stood there, stripped of her necklace, stripped of her husband's money, and stripped of the lies that had protected her for 34 years. The guests were gone. The music was dead. All that was left was the truth, and the truth was driving her insane. "You ruined everything," she screamed. The sound tore at her throat, raw and animalistic. She looked around wildly, her eyes landing on the table beside her. There, resting on a silver platter next to the untouched tower of red velvet cake, was a long, serrated knife. It was meant for cutting the first slice at midnight. It was meant for celebration. Now it was a weapon. Vanessa grabbed the handle. Her knuckles turned white. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She just reacted with the blind fury of a narcissist who had lost control. "I will kill you!" she shrieked, lunging toward me. My mother screamed. My father froze. Brad scrambled backward on his hands and knees. But I did not move. I did not flinch. I did not even raise my hands to defend myself, because I knew something they didn't. I knew who was standing behind the elevator doors. Just as the silver blade caught the light, the elevator chime pinged. The doors slid open with a smooth hiss. 3 figures in dark tactical suits blurred into the room. They moved with a speed and precision that made Vanessa look like she was moving in slow motion. These were not the mall cops downstairs. This was top-tier private security, the kind that cost more per hour than my father made in a week. Before Vanessa could take 2 steps, the lead guard intercepted her. He didn't strike her. He simply controlled her. He grabbed her wrist, twisting it sharply. The knife clattered to the hardwood floor with a metallic ring that echoed through the room. In one fluid motion, he spun her around and forced her to the ground. "Let me go," Vanessa wailed, kicking and thrashing. "I am the lady of the house. Let me go. You are a threat to the principal," the guard said, his voice devoid of emotion. He pressed her face against the cold floor, securing her hands behind her back with plastic zip ties. The golden child, the beauty queen, was now pinned to the ground like a common criminal, her expensive dress bunched up, her hair a tangled mess. A fourth man stepped out of the elevator. He walked calmly through the chaos, adjusting his rimless glasses. He was wearing a charcoal wool coat over a sharp suit, holding a leather portfolio. It was Mr. Sterling, my attorney. He stopped in front of Vanessa, looked down at her, and then stepped over her, as if she were a spill on the rug. He walked straight to me and handed me a document. "Ms. Williams," he said, his voice calm and authoritative. "The police have been notified of an assault in progress. They are 2 minutes away." He turned to face the rest of the family. My parents were huddled together near the fireplace. Brad was still on the floor near the window. Mr. Sterling opened a folder and began to read. "Assault with a deadly weapon," he announced. "Attempted bodily harm against the homeowner, malicious destruction of property, and criminal trespassing." He looked up, his gaze sweeping over my father and mother. "This is an official notice of immediate eviction for cause. The lease is terminated. The grace period is revoked. Because a weapon was drawn, this is no longer a civil matter. It is a crime scene." He checked his expensive watch. "You have 10 minutes to remove your personal effects and vacate the premises. Anything left behind after 10 minutes will be considered abandoned property and disposed of by the cleaning crew. If you are still on this property when the police elevator arrives, you will be arrested as accomplices to the assault." He closed the folder with a snap. "Start packing," he said. The room erupted into panicked motion. The illusion of dignity was gone. My mother grabbed a trash bag from the kitchen and started shoving her coats into it. My father was trying to find his shoes. Brad was weeping, trying to stuff his tuxedo shirt into a duffel bag. I stood in the center of the storm, watching them scurry. 10 minutes. That was all it took to erase a lifetime of their dominance. I looked down at Vanessa, who was still struggling against the zip ties, sobbing into the floorboards. "Happy New Year, Vanessa," I whispered. "Enjoy the view from down there." The 10-minute deadline was not a suggestion. It was a hard stop. The penthouse, which had been a sanctuary of false pretenses for 3 years, instantly dissolved into a chaotic scene of panic and indignity. There were no Louis Vuitton trunks waiting to be packed. There were no garment bags. The security team had tossed a roll of heavy-duty black trash bags onto the floor, and that was the luggage my family would be taking with them into their new life. I leaned against the marble island in the kitchen, watching the frantic dismantling of their facade. It was a humiliating spectacle. Vanessa was on her knees, shoving her collection of silk dresses into a plastic sack. The sequins caught the light one last time before disappearing into the darkness of the garbage bag. It was a perfect metaphor. Her entire identity, all that sparkle and shine, was being treated like refuse. She was sobbing uncontrollably, wiping her nose on the sleeve of a Chanel jacket before stuffing that into the bag too. Brad was no better. He was frantically moving around the bedroom trying to save his suits. He grabbed armfuls of Italian wool and Egyptian cotton, crushing them into tight balls to make them fit. He looked at his sneaker collection, the limited editions he kept on display shelves, and realized he couldn't take them all. He screamed in frustration, kicking a pair of Jordans across the room. The man who had lectured me about finance was now choosing which shoes to abandon because he couldn't carry them. My mother Viola was the most pathetic sight of all. The woman who would not be caught dead without her pearls was dragging a trash bag across the floor that was so heavy it was tearing at the seams. It was filled with her furs. She looked like a scavenger. My father, Otis, wandered aimlessly, holding a bottle of scotch in one hand and a single dress shoe in the other, his eyes glazed over with shock. He looked old. For the first time, I didn't see the tyrant who had controlled my life. I saw a frail, defeated old man who had bet his retirement on a lie and lost everything. "Time is up," the lead guard announced, his voice booming through the apartment. He didn't point them toward the main elevator, the gold-plated lift that opened into the marble lobby. He pointed toward the back of the kitchen, to the service elevator, the freight lift used for deliveries and garbage removal. My mother gasped. "We cannot go down in that," she wailed. "It is for the help." "You are not the help," the guard said coldly. "You are trespassers. Move." They were herded like cattle toward the scuffed metal doors. The elevator smelled of bleach and old food. The lighting inside was harsh and fluorescent, stripping away the last remnants of their glamour. As they were shoved inside, crammed together with their black plastic bags, Brad finally snapped. He turned on Vanessa, his face twisted with hate. "I am done!" he screamed, his voice echoing in the steel box. "I am calling a lawyer the second I get a signal. I want a divorce." "Brad, no," Vanessa pleaded, reaching for his arm. "Do not touch me," he spat, recoiling from her. "You are a fraud. You ruined my life. You disgust me." My mother started wailing louder. My father just stared at the floor. I walked to the doorway of the kitchen. I held my glass of tap water in my hand. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The water was cool and clean. It tasted like victory. I caught Brad's eye just as the heavy steel doors began to slide shut. He looked at me with a mix of fear and envy. He looked at the warm, beautiful penthouse behind me, and then he looked at the trash bag in his hand. "Goodbye," I said softly. The doors slammed shut with a final metallic clang, cutting off the sound of their screaming. The arrow above the elevator lit up, pointing down. Down to the street. Down to the cold. Down to where they belonged. I finished my water, set the glass on the counter, and took a deep breath of the silence. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The interior of the Maybach was silent, a hermetically sealed capsule of soft cream leather and ambient lighting that glided over the potholes of Atlanta as if they did not exist. It had been exactly 60 minutes since the steel doors of the service elevator had clamped shut on the screams of my family. 60 minutes since I walked out of the rear entrance of the Sapphire Tower past the confused doorman and into the waiting car. The air inside the limousine smelled of fresh citrus and expensive conditioning polish, a sharp contrast to the smell of bleach and desperation I had left behind. I picked up the crystal glass of sparkling water from the center console. My hand was steady. There was no adrenaline left in my system, only a profound, quiet exhaustion that felt strangely like relief. It was the feeling a patient has after a long, complicated surgery to remove a malignant growth. You are sore, you are tired, but you know that the thing that was killing you is finally gone. My phone buzzed against the leather seat. I looked at the caller ID. It was Julian. I swiped to answer, bringing the phone to my ear. "Hello, Julian," I said. My voice was calm, the voice of the woman who ran portfolios worth billions, not the voice of the scapegoat sister. "Yes, it is done. The asset has been liquidated." I paused, listening to his deep, reassuring laugh on the other end. "No, I am not talking about the building," I said, a small smile touching my lips. "I am talking about the emotional liability. I just closed the account permanently." I looked out the tinted window at the passing city. The snow was falling harder now, blurring the streetlights into streaks of yellow and white. "The flight plan is filed," I continued. "I will be at Le Bourget by morning. Meet me at the George V for breakfast. I think I am finally ready to discuss that merger. And Julian, order the good champagne. I have something to celebrate." I hung up the phone and leaned back into the seat. The driver slowed down as we approached the intersection near the subway station. The traffic light turned red. I looked out the window, and there they were. Huddled together on the metal bench of the bus stop under the harsh glare of a street lamp was a group of people who looked like they had been shipwrecked. I saw a woman in a ruined sequined dress trying to wrap a thin black plastic trash bag around her shoulders for warmth. Her hair, once perfect, was plastered to her skull by the wet snow. I saw a man in a tuxedo, stripped of his coat, kicking violently at a pile of gray slush, shouting into the wind. I saw an older couple holding on to each other, not out of love but out of sheer biological survival, their faces gray with cold and shock. They looked small. They looked freezing. They looked like strangers. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror. His eyes flicked from the scene outside back to me. He recognized them. "Do you want me to stop, Ms. Williams?" he asked softly. "It is 20 degrees out there." I looked at them for 1 second longer. I looked at the people who had drained me dry for 30 years. I remembered the car they sold. I remembered the nose job. I remembered the insults. I remembered the way my mother looked when she tried to steal my phone. If I stopped, they would get in. They would warm up. And by tomorrow morning, they would be explaining how I owed them this. They would be gaslighting me. They would be feeding on me again. "No, Thomas," I said. "Keep driving." The light turned green. The car surged forward smooth and powerful. I reached out and pressed the button on the door panel. The privacy shade slid up with a soft mechanical whir, blocking the view of the street, blocking the view of the bus stop, blocking them out of my universe forever. I looked down at my phone one last time. The screen was lighting up with a flood of notifications. Texts from unknown numbers, missed calls from borrowed phones, voicemails pleading for mercy. I did not read them. I went to the settings menu. I selected the option for unknown callers. I pressed block. Then I went to my contact list and selected select all. I pressed delete. The screen went quiet. The digital noise vanished. I took a sip of water and closed my eyes as the car accelerated toward the private airfield. The tumor was gone. The surgery was successful. And for the first time in my life, the silence wasn't lonely. It was free. I look back at my own choices and I tell you, this don't do it the way I did. I stayed silent too long, hoping pain would teach people to love me. It didn't. What it taught me through family betrayal is that boundaries matter more than approval. My faith carried me when anger tempted me toward family revenge, and God reminded me to choose clarity over cruelty. God didn't ask me to destroy. God asked me to tell the truth. If you're living through family betrayal, learn earlier than I did. Stop financing disrespect. Stop excusing lies, and don't confuse loyalty with self-erasure. Family revenge feels powerful, but peace lasts longer when consequences are clean and honest. When family betrayal tries to define you, remember who you are, not who they made you. Let family revenge be replaced with self-respect, and let the boundary you enforce be the end. What would you do differently? Share your thoughts below, and if this resonated, consider sharing and subscribing. Thank you for staying until the end. Please note, upcoming stories may include fictionalized elements created for educational purposes. If that's not for you, feel free to choose content that fits you better.